Okay, today I'm painting outside, and hopefully the light will be okay. It's really nice out here today in Phoenix. There's a little bit of background noise, so we'll see how it goes, but I love to paint outside when I can, and I'm going to be doing my Christmas video. And I got this idea from a sewing pattern that I created some time ago that is available on my sewing website, and I'll post the link to that as well. And I really like that pattern, so I'm going to turn it into a painting. Of course, now because I'm filming, every car in the area feels it needs to drive by. But it's very, very nice out here. We can only be outside in Phoenix during the winter months, fall and winter, so I try to make the most of it. Now, I've mentioned in my other videos that canvases rarely come with enough gesso. If there's not enough gesso on the canvas, then your paint is going to sink into the cloth, and you'll go through a lot more paint and you won't really be happy with the results. So I put on extra gesso. And I'm going to have the snowman and tree and things over in these areas, and I want to add texture for that. So I'm also going to be using my permanent patch 101 so that I can get a nice texture in the snow. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just start putting down the gesso, and then I'll have to let that dry. Once the gesso has dried, I can start painting. Now I should say this permanent patch I'm very, very happy with. I couldn't get the lid to quite fit back onto it the way that I wanted though, so even though I've cleaned up the upper area of it. So what I do with it is I keep it in a Ziploc bag. So now this is going to be the snow that you see at the bottom of the painting. And I'm doing this from memory at this point, but I'm going to go print out a photo of my original design. I'll take it right from my website. And if you would like to make this painting, feel free to print off the photo as well. Okay, now I have printed out my patterns from my craft and sewing website, craftandfabriclinks.com. I used to do a lot of sewing, and now that I've started painting, I'm going back and looking at some of my old sewing patterns and realizing that some of them can make really nice paintings. And I have turned one of my Christmas patterns into a painting idea, and that's what I'm doing today. You can get these printouts directly from my sewing website, Craft and Fabric Links, and I'll provide the link to that. And it's basically the same design. This is just printed on a rectangular sheet of paper, but the original sewing pattern was almost a square, and this now is on an actual square, and I've enlarged the whole thing. Other than that, I'm pretty much copying what I had before. So I will keep it like this. This is just a quick print. It doesn't show the actual real colors of the original. I'm out of red ink, so this doesn't look right, but it gives me an idea for something to follow. So I have also used my sewing ruler. If you do a lot of painting that requires any kind of precision lines, and if you're like me and you're not real good at drawing straight lines, I highly recommend this. I wanted my star to be exactly straight, and I can't do that without a sewing ruler. I can line this up on this side so I know that it's absolutely straight. Not with regular ruler, it might be straight, but it might be going like this. And for the design of the star, if you want it to look like that, you can get that right from my pattern page. So now I can go ahead and start laying down more texture now that I know where things are going to be. And I think I'll start putting down some texture that will be my tree area, and I may lay down some texture where I'm going to have my snowman. And I believe that I will use the permanent patch again. I like that as far as texture goes. I can get a lot heavier texture, and it is paintable. I'm not going to film a lot of this part because you've seen me put texture down here, and I don't know how, I don't think it's showing real well anyway, but this gives you some idea. Since this is the tree, you can be pretty free with the texture. Now down here is where the packages will be under the tree, so I'm not going to put too much more there. And he can be fairly smooth because he's the finished snowman. So I don't want anything really in here. Ball there where that little fluffy end is, that would be a good spot for a little texture. And I'll put a little texture down for the head of the snowman. Of course, the scarf is going to sit right here. Can build that up a little bit too. Maybe add a little bit of, if you dab at it like this, it kind of makes a little bit of a furry look. Okay, now I need to let that thoroughly dry. I'm not going to have this textured. I'll have a little bit of a glow around it in the sky later. So this will probably take at least a few hours, and I will start painting when it's ready. I sometimes add paint color to my texture as I go along, but I decided not to do that today. It works either way. If you watch my other videos where I use this permanent patch, I sometimes do add paint to it, and sometimes I paint over it. So you can play around with that and decide which method you prefer. Okay, so I'm going to get started. I'm going to use a mixture of my various blues, which I list on this site there. For my base coat, I'm just throwing down a mixture of my colors. This darkest is my Payne's Gray, and I like to mix it with some of the other colors. And I can see what kind of effect I'm getting as I go along. I want this to be a bright and pretty painting. This is a night sky, but it doesn't need to be real dark. I like having a variety of color. I think it adds interest to the painting. If away from the star, it can be a little bit darker. So all of my colors are just lying on my palette here, and I just kind of grab one as I go along, depending on what I feel like at the moment. Lay it down in different directions so I get some interesting movement there. Cerulean blue has a little bit more of a, towards the turquoise, I guess it's not really green color, but it adds some interest. And I'm coming up close to the tree, and I can run over the tree a little bit. It's perfectly fine because I will be going over that later. The tree will be painted after my background is in. This paint spray almost has a look of black to it, but it's really not. It's a real nice color to use instead of black so that you're not getting too dark. And then up in this area, I want it to be lighter. And in fact, I want it to be green, but I want to put I'm going to put a base coat of yellow down here. It's not looking real yellow because I have blue in my brush. If I put a base coat of yellow, I think that'll help add a nice glow when I come over it later. And when you're doing something like this, you want to think about what color the object is going to be. These are going to be shades of green, and depending on how dark I want to go with them, I have to think about that with the sky behind it. Because you don't want the painting to all be the same value. And for the tree to stand out, it shouldn't be the exact same value. And by value, I'm not talking about the color. I'm talking about the depth of the color. If it were a black and white photo, what would it look like? And there needs to be contrast, and right now there's very nice contrast because the tree is white against this dark background. It tells me I really don't want my tree to be real dark. If I painted this a real deep evergreen, it would just sort of blend in to the background. Now I have put in the dark background mixed with all the colors like I showed. I put in the yellow behind the star, and now I'm just coming through and just sort of adding these little flicks of blue like this. It's actually cerulean blue with a bit of white in it, and I kind of like that effect. Okay, I let this dry overnight, and now I'm going to be working on the tree. After I get the tree done and the snowman and scarf and the ground, then I will go back and do any final touches to the sky. There are a few places where the canvas is showing through here, so I definitely need to cover that. And I'll do a little more work up around here in the glow area around the star as well. Now for the Christmas tree itself, I have a mixture of all of the colors that I'm listing on the screen for you. And I just have them out here on my palette, and I will mix them up as I go depending on what I feel at the moment. I don't use any black because black I think is too harsh. I usually use either raw umber, which is a very, very dark brown, or I use Payne's Gray depending on what I'm working with. Payne's Gray is a blue that is so dark it almost looks like black, but it's softer than black. And I don't want any one color to be too prevalent in any one area, so I move things around. Now this is a mixture here of the umber, the dark umber, or excuse me, the raw umber, and the green. You can see the brown tint to it. This is the Payne's Gray mixed with the green. So I will put down a few layers so that I have some depth to my tree. Starting with the dark layers, and then I'll start adding lighter tones. I still have some blue from yesterday, and I think I may toss in a little bit of that too, because it's pretty. It brings in a little different tone. Another color that I like to use that I don't have out right now is Alizarin Crimson. I think I'll grab some of that, because there could be some little red tones in the tree as well. At this point, I'm still just laying down a lot of various colors to add depth to the painting, and I'm making sure that I have filled any little areas, little cracks and crevices that were created by the texture. And that's why sometimes I mix some color with the texture, and I don't have to worry later about covering any white that shows. But this works fine too. So I'm throwing in some dark to give depth, and I'll come back later and add highlights to my tree. I know right now it's quite dark. That shows a little bit of what it'll look like later when I add some lighter tones. But I will have to let this dry thoroughly, and then I'll be able to tell where I need to add any more paint to make sure that it's all covered well. But remember that when you're working with acrylic paints, it's all about layering. So I just grab various colors at any given time, and it can get mixed up on my plate. I've got some browns and some greens here, so I'll throw in a little of that. And then if I want to lighten it up a little, I can come back. I might throw in a little bit of Payne's Gray with one of my pretty blues. That adds a little bit of a different effect. So don't worry a whole lot about what colors you're grabbing at this point. Just remember that this is a base, and then we will go back later and add the outer coats, which will brighten it up, especially along the edges here. We don't want this tree to fade into the background, because like I said, right now this is just a base coat, and what I was talking about earlier about values, these values are all fairly similar here. The tree is about the same value as the background. If this was a black and white photo, you almost wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So I will need to add a lot of highlights along the tree area. But I like to lay down my dark tones first and then come back and add the light. And just to show you, I'll do more of this later, but this is my Alizarin Crimson. And I like to throw in a little bit of that as well. because there can be highlights that are a little bit reddish in a tree. If you mix it in right, it doesn't stand out like suddenly a bright red spot on the tree. So that is the base coat for my tree, and like I said, I need to let that dry now, and then I can go back and fill in any little texture areas that I see. So while that is drying, I can start working on my snow. Now while I'm waiting for my tree to dry, I'm going to go ahead and start working on my snow. I changed my water because I definitely do not want green in my snow. I washed my brush. Still a little bit of green in the brush, but I'm going to be using white, a little bit of Payne's Gray for shadow. I can throw in a few other colors here and there too, but I don't really want green down in here, I don't think. So I know this is already white, but this is just my wall patch and some areas, some gesso and things, so I do want to cover that. And if I pick up a tiny bit of Payne's Gray on my brush with the white, that automatically puts in a little bit of shadow for me. I can have a little bit of brighter shadow as well. The snow is not ever actually totally white. You don't want it to look like dirty snow, you just want it to look like a shadow. So I think I'll stick to the burnt sienna. It's a little bit of the alizarin crimson thrown in there. I don't want pink snow either, but I do like throwing in a little bit of extra color. So I have a little bit of nice color scattered around here. And then the rest of it I can probably fill in with mostly white. Let me do a little bit of blue on this side of the snowman. Again, there's still shadow over here. The star is behind him, so there's going to be a bit of shadow here. For the snowman's hat, I'm using naphthol red and a little bit of processed magenta. And I don't want to use too much of the processed magenta. It's slightly to the pink. I don't want it to look too pink. I also have the alizarin crimson that can be good for the shading part of it. And then I have the naphthol crimson here, which is really a nice color. It's very bright. shading of the hat. I can use a little bit of the Payne's Gray in here and Alizarin Crimson. Now I'll let this dry before I fuss around with that anymore. And when I'm all finished, I believe that I will come back and go over this with one more coat of white mixed with glazing medium. That will even out some of this shadowing and give it a smoother appearance. And then I'll still have some touch up of the snow to do. But for now I'm going to add his arms, which is going to be old wood with some little sticks coming off the ends, little frazzly looking pieces of wood that can be the fingers. This is a flat number 2. What size you use depends on the size of your canvas. Warm gray is one of my favorite colors because it's to the warm tone rather than yellow. And when I mix it, just dip my brush a little bit in the, say, dark brown. I'm using raw umber right now. And then I dip the other side in the warm gray and I start to paint. It gives me this look of wood automatically. Okay, now I'm going to let it dry overnight, and it needs to be thoroughly dry before I do any more. I have come back and finished the hat here, and I laid down a coat of paint over the star, cover up my pencil marks, and I'll have to do that again. It'll take a few layers because I'm going to have some sort of dimension to the star as well. And I'm not quite sure yet what I'll do there. So I'll let it dry and I'll look at it for a few days, and then I will come back and finish the tree and finish my snowman, finish this area of the sky, and do any touch up on the snow that I need. Okay, I've come back and fixed this little area here more to my liking, and I touched up a few areas where the white canvas was showing through, or I should say probably the texture underneath was showing through. So at this point I'm going to add some highlights to my tree and kind of bring that out a little bit more. I can even throw in a little dab of yellow up on the top here, because this is getting the light from the star. When I first started the painting, I mentioned values as far as this tree goes. And then I put down my darker background, and I hadn't yet gone over and added the light layers over the dark background. And the painting was sitting in a room one evening where there wasn't much light, and the eye sees more to gray tones when there's not very much light, and that really highlighted the fact that I didn't have enough value difference between the tree and the background. So I'm showing now on the screen a black and white photo of the painting, and that's where it really stands out. And then next to that I'll have a black and white photo of the finished version, and you can see the difference between the two. What I'm going to do now is add a bit more highlight on this side of the tree, because I want it to stand out just a little bit more for the light of the star shining on it. And I think that I'll use a little bit of a light yellow to make that just really a bit more vibrant. And I'll touch up a little bit of the top of the hat here as well. The next thing that I'll do is add the little fingers here and the fringe. For the fringe of the scarf, I added Payne's gray and red, and I used a small outliner brush to put small strokes across there. Then I went over it with another layer using white and red, and that gave me a little bit of a lighter look. And when it completely dries, I will go back and add maybe a third layer using some more red and probably some white. That gives a little bit of dimension to the fringe. For the little fingers of the snowman, I used warm gray, Payne's gray, raw umber, and burnt sienna, and a very small outlining brush, and just made little strokes like that. And it just gives the feeling of little fingers off the end of the wood. When it's all completely finished drying, I will mix some glazing liquid satin finish with white, and I'll smooth this out a little bit with that. And then the final part will be to just add the face and the buttons. The painting has dried now for a couple of days, and I'm going to go ahead and blend the snowman a bit better. And to do that, I'm using white, Payne's gray, and ultramarine blue. And I'm going to get a very, very light mix of that, and then I'll mix the glazing medium with it. And the glazing medium thins the paint so that it's just a very thin coating of paint. It's as if you've mixed a lot of water in with it. For the blending, I'm using a very, very soft brush. experimenting with different brushes, you'll find that they all have different effects. If you use a stiff brush, you'll get more of a stroke look to what you're doing. And to me, this is a little bit too much of a hard lines, because it kind of gives a look as if it was carved out of wood. And I want this to be very soft, as if it's just smoothed down snow. And I think I can get that effect better with a much softer brush. Softer brushes are better for blending. So the first thing I will do is I'll get the color that I want. So I'm taking just a bit of white, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I don't want it to be too blue. That's why I brought in a little bit of the Payne's gray. So this is the glazing medium. It'll actually dry clear. And if I mix a lot of that in with my paint, I get a much thinner paint. So I can sort of smooth this out a bit, give it a softer look. Now this has taken off some of the harder strokes that showed in here, and I like this look better. After that has dried, I can go back and add the buttons on the body and put in the face. So the only thing that I have now is any touch up on the fringe that I want to do, and maybe anything in here. And I think maybe for that, just to make that a little more realistic, have a little dimension to it, I'll just add just a tiny little bit of tone to that. And I'm just using some of what I have left from what I used on the body. So it's not just totally white. So this part has already dried enough that I can paint on the face and things. It's just ever so slightly tacky. And I'm going back to my original sketch for an idea of the face. So I have my colors on my plate and a very small outliner brush. And like I do with any time I'm painting, I just pick up a little bit of each color, maybe throw in a little bit of white. And you don't really have to worry at this point. If you make a mistake and you don't like where you have things, you can always go back and change. So that was just to kind of get the original down. I think maybe, don't really like where that ended up. I think I'll paint that out. Put this more up here. For the fringe of the scarf, I'm putting in, again, this Liquitex Heavy Body Acrylic Naphthol Crimson. It's a beautiful red. And I just want some of this fringe to look a little redder here. And I use just a touch of glazing medium along with the white paint there to smooth that out. And I think that's it now. Thank you for watching, and be sure to go to craftandfabriclinks.com for my actual pattern for this, my original quilt block pattern, and I will list the link below in the description under the video. And you can also do a search for Christmas block pattern on the website itself, or go to the holiday section of patterns and you'll find it there.